Hey everybody, it's Dr. Dost. Welcome back to my channel, Biblical Languages and Literature. Today we're going to be looking at Daniel 1:7 as part of our textual analysis of the Hebrew Bible series. Before we begin, be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click the bell below to be notified when I publish additional lessons in this series. Be sure to click the like button, and if you would, please be sure to share these videos on your social media accounts just so we can attract more followers. All right, let's get started. So Daniel 1:7, we're going to read the text a little faster, then a little slower, then a little faster again. But I would encourage you to pause the recording so that you can try reading it on your own and then compare it with what you hear and try to improve your reading. Nobody ever gets better at reading aloud by not reading aloud. Just saying. All right, here we go. Vayasem lehem sar ha'soisim shemot. Vayasem leDaniel Belteshazzar ולחנניה שדרך ולמישאל משח ולעזריה אבדנגו. Vayasem lahem sar hasarisim shemot. Vayasem leDaniel Belteshazzar ולחנניה שדרך ולמישאל משח ולעזריה אבדנגו. וישם להם שר הסריסים שמות. וישם לדניאל בלתשצר ולחנניה שדרך ולמישאל משח ולעזריה אבדנגו. Okay, so the first word we have here is vayasem, and this is from the root sin yud mem. Sin yud mem, it's a hollow verb in the vav consecutive, call. And it can mean, and he put, now he put, but in this case it means now he gave, or to appoint. And he appointed for them, or gave to them, designated for them, one could say. So we've got the verb, we've got the indirect object. So the subject then comes next, sar hasrisim, what is often translated as chief of the eunuchs, sar hasrisim. Now there is some uncertainty as to what these terms actually designate. As we mentioned before in our comments on Rav Sarisav in Daniel 1:3. But in any event, sar is a masculine singular construct form, which would mean something to the effect of the chief of, and then hasarisim might be the eunuchs, so the chief of the eunuchs. So the chief of the eunuchs gave to them shemot, names. Now the singular is shem, as you're probably familiar with, but the plural of shem, even though it's masculine, is shemot. Shemot. And then it continues, Vayasem leDaniel, and he gave to Daniel, and there's basically an ellipsis here. He gave the name to Daniel, or he gave to Daniel the name Belteshazzar, which, we typically pronounce in English as Belteshazzar, but Hebrew here it's Belteshazzar. And then, and to Hananiah, Velachananya, and to Hananiah, and we're supposed to read the name. He gave the name Shadrach, ulemishael, and to Mishael. Now notice that it's not the lemishael. Why is it u? Because the lamed, the preposition lamed, has a schwa, and so therefore it needs to be u lemishael, meshach. Vela'azariah, Abednego, and to Azariah the name Abednego, as we say in English. Okay, so there's not anything terribly tough about this verse. This is actually the easiest one I think we've come across so far, just because there are so many names, very little syntactical difficulty. So I want to take a few minutes just to look at some of the accent patterns, then we'll look at some Masorah together. All right, so first, let's identify some of the major disjunctive accents that we've seen so far. So first off, we have the siluk on the final word, nego, the second part of the name there. So that's the siluk, and that is the final disjunctive accent of pretty much any verse. And that is a disjunctive accent that occurs on the last word of a verse. It's also historically known as sof pasuk, even though the two dots that look like a colon that follow it are also called sof pasuk. So there's siluk, and then you remember at the halfway point, the quote-unquote halfway point, we're generally going to see an atnach. And this verse actually divides up quite nicely into two sense units. So vayasem lahem sar hasrisim shemot, and the chief of the eunuchs gave to them names, and that's the first half of the verse. And then the rest of the verse, in terms of sense, is what the names were. So this is actually a very logical place to put the second disjunctive accent, the atnach. Okay, so we have the siluk on the go, and the atnach on shemot. Now, another disjunctive accent that we've seen regularly is the zakef katan, which looks like a schwa above the word. And there are two of them in this particular verse. The first one is on shadrach, shadrach. And the second one is on meshach, meshach. Okay, so we've got atnach, zakef katan, and siluk. Now you'll notice that those two instances of zakef katan appear on new names that are given. So Hananiah's name is Shadrach, and Mishael's name is Meshach. Now Daniel's name, over Daniel's new name, Belteshazzar, we have another disjunctive accent, the revia, revia. Okay, now let's talk about some of the other accents that we've seen. So we've got just one instance of the conjunctive accent, munach. And that occurs on ulemishael, ulemishael. So we've got a conjunctive disjunctive pattern there. We've seen the conjunctive accent, melcha, and that occurs twice in this verse. We have two instances of the disjunctive accent, tifcha, one following a mercha in the phrase sar hasrisav, and one at the beginning of a new phrase on belat zarya. We have the disjunctive accent tvir on the second word of the verse, lahem, vayasem lahem, and that's preceded by the conjunctive accent darga, darga, on the word vayasem, vayasem. On the second instance of vayasem, we get the conjunctive accent azla, azla, and that's followed by the disjunctive accent geresh, geresh. Now this pattern of azla geresh actually occurs pretty regularly. We see it on the phrase vitove mare, which means nice of appearance, good of appearance, vitove mare, and that's a construct phrase. It occurs in Daniel 1:5 on lahem hamelech, vaiman lahem hamelech, and he assigned to them the king, and so the king assigned to them. We see it, of course, in Daniel 1:7 here, on vayasem le Daniel, and he appointed for Daniel, or he gave to Daniel. It shows up again in Daniel 2:2 on liko lechotumim, which means to command the magicians, or something along those lines. We see it in Aramaic in Daniel 2:47, ane malka le Daniel. So ane means he answered the king to Daniel. He answered the king to Daniel, or the king responded or answered Daniel, we would say. And then our last example that we'll look at is Daniel 2:48, Adayin Malka, also in Aramaic, then the king, Adayin Malka. Okay, now the last accent to look at is on Vilachnanya, and this is the disjunctive accent pashta, pashta. So that at least gets us acquainted with the cantillation pattern of Daniel 1:7, and as we've been seeing in the previous videos, we're going to see many of these patterns fairly regularly. But hopefully by now you're starting to become acquainted with some of the names. I know this is difficult material, but little by little you get the hang of it, and it makes reading the Hebrew Bible and even interpreting the Hebrew Bible a little bit easier. All right, now let's have a look at the Lenrad Codex, and you can see that Daniel 1:7 begins right over here with Vayasem, Vayasem. And this note has a surcillis, or this this word, I should say, has a surcillis over it, which draws our attention to the Masorah over here. And it says 2 times, and then the word pasuk, so 2 verses have Vayasem, Vayasem. So presumably 2 verses in which Vayasem occurs twice. And so we see after doing an electronic search that the only other occurrence is Leviticus 8:9. And those results are confirmed by going to the Dotan Reich Thesaurus, which says Vayikra, Leviticus, Chet, Tet, 8:9. Now going back to the manuscript, we see that over Bel Teshatzar, there's a Masoretic note, or a surcillis, with a Masoretic note with a hey, and then the comment Beit Tet Ayin, with this accent, 5 times with this accent. Now, as you can see, there is a munach underneath the hey. So apparently, or ostensibly, this Masoretic note is talking about the form Bel Teshatzar with a munach in it. So if we do a search of the book of Daniel, we see that Bel Teshatzar occurs in Daniel 1:7 with a munach. But as we scroll through the other instances, we see that none of them have that accent. So a little bit of additional investigation is required. But as we zoom in on this form, we see in the manuscript that it appears as if there is a zakef katan on the final letter, or above the final letter. Now, interestingly, when we look at the electronic edition, we see that that is not the case, that there is actually a revia there. And so this form, as it appears in the electronic edition, actually looks very different than what we find in the manuscript. Those 3 dots there for the vowel here, for Vayasem. And there is no sign of the revia. But when we go to the Masorah Magna, what we find here is that it says Chamesh Milim, 5 words, Chamesh Milim, with the reading of their accents as shofar, which is another name for munach, and revia. Revia. And so there are 5 times in the Bible where munach and revia should occur together, according to the Masorah. And if you were to follow this out, you would see that the catchwords or catchphrases are listed here. And the final one for Bel Teshatzar is, Daniel 1:7. But then we've got an instance from Kohelet 4:10 or Ecclesiastes 4:10, Zechariah 7:14, Zechariah 7:14. Okay, then Exodus 32:31 and Genesis 45:5. Now, what's interesting is that as we go down through go down to the end of the note, after the 5 catchwords or catchphrases, it says Usha'ar shofar b'zakef. And the rest are munach or shofar and zakef katan. So this is fascinating that the manuscript disagrees with the Masorah here. So we've stumbled across one instance of where the Masorah and the manuscript itself, the vocalization of the manuscript, disagree. All right, well, I think that's sufficient for this video. Look forward to seeing you next time. Again, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, click the bell, hit the like button, and share the video through your social media accounts. I really appreciate it. See you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.